Welcome to Between Two Brunettes, a show dedicated to highlighting Canadian voices.
Together, we're sharing authentic conversations with the people shaping the future of Canada.
We hope you enjoy the show.
Rolling still?
Yeah.
Okay. Today we have with us Dan Eberhard, founder and CEO of KOHO, a Canadian fintech company revolutionizing banking, democratizing access to the best financial products, and helping over, last I checked, 2 million Canadians save, borrow, spend, transfer money better. We also recently found out that you're actually a two-time founder with a previous exit in renewable energy, a, quote, reluctant banker, and most importantly, a proud girl dad. But now we found out you have a son, so boy dad as well.
Yep.
Welcome to the show. Are you ready for a conversation between two brunettes?
Love it. That was awesome. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to be here, and I think we want to start at the beginning with you because you have had two companies now, one exit. To Germana's point, did the entrepreneurialness start as a child? What were you like growing up? What did your childhood look like?
The rougher part of this is my dad passed away when I was 2, and we were born in Australia, and then we moved to Canada, and then we ended up living in a small town when I was 7 in BC. And my mom was a single mom to 2 kids, you know, and she worked very hard. It was very obvious to us that she was working very hard, but I had a lot of time to myself as a kid, you know, I was a younger brother. And so I think semi-organically, I just had a lot of agency and was left alone a lot as a kid. And so I do think that instilled kind of a little bit of that independence pretty early. Maybe the other thing is my mom instilled just a very strong sense of how fortunate we were. I think if you grow up middle class in Canada, you've kind of won the lottery.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so what I kind of keyed on fairly early was I just want to be useful at scale. And so that's kind of been the through line of my career.
Mm-hmm.
In university, I ended up starting co-founding a wind energy company. My friend was a CEO. He had graduated a year prior, and it started as a class project. And it was when I was comparing this to going and getting a job as a supply chain logistics manager at Husky Oil versus shooting a shot and because the returns were good on wind farms and on these private wind turbines, and ended up cutting that way. And so I've been in every town in southern Saskatchewan. We would host town halls and put out milk and cookies and coffee and super scrappy. I had plugs in my ears and was trying to sell wind turbines to 7-year-old farmers, and they mostly laughed at me.
7-year-old, it's crazy.
They were like, "What are you doing here?"
What was the state renewable energy wind turbine in Canada on the west at that point?
Yeah, it's a good question. At that time, there was a lot of excitement around these kind of things, but very little had been proven out. It's evolved a lot since then. It's got a lot more mature since then. But, there was enormous government programs, particularly on Ontario, which were subsidizing 40 or 50% of the development costs of these things, even though economically they made no sense at the time because the technology wasn't very good yet.
Yeah.
So we would look at these things and we would say the returns on these things are actually really good with this Saskatchewan power program, right? And that kind of put us onto it. And so we found some company to manufacture and build them, but it was really early. So people genuinely didn't know what a wind turbine was. Let alone a 22-year-old kid who's and you're just an old school farmer being what are you doing here? So we won the ability to build a 20 megawatt wind farm in Saskatchewan.
Mm-hmm.
We had no idea how to build a wind farm. So a year later, a year later, we sold it to a company called Algonquin Power. It's now called the Red Lily Wind Farm. It's pretty cool to see it because they're enormous. But and so that was the first one. We definitely got lucky, but we also kind of put ourselves in a position to be lucky.
I'm seeing the sprinkles of the creativity and result of you having a lot of spare time as a child,
Exactly.
Think through how to structure that well.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of, in hindsight, it always reads that way. The truth is you're making it up as it go along. And then inevitably, when you look back on these things historically, you piece it together and you can kind of tell that fact pattern. But we were lost in the woods for a long time too, and had the Green Option Partners program not stood up, we wouldn't be here. I think our luck is super underrated in all these kinds of things. So you got to put yourself in a position to be lucky, but we definitely got lucky.
You did.
Yeah.
And you went. And then
Fast
took some time off, and then what?
Traveled a lot.
Yeah. Where'd you go?
A lot of places. All in all, I've spent about 2 years kind of with a backpack on, bumming around different parts of the world. motorbike through Burma.
I've done the same. Not motorbike, but biked.
Oh yeah, cool. It's
Don't
awesome.
motor to it.
Yeah.
Like a Vespa, but not
That's so good. When was that?
2017.
Okay,
It was
cool.
insane.
Yeah. So special. Anyway, yeah, I've done Northern Africa, a bunch of Europe, Southeast Asia a few times, climbing trips. Every kind of 2 years, we try and get a real adventure trip in. So it's like it's still part of it. Anyway, I did that. Angel invested for a while. Tried another company which didn't work, which was in flare gas capture. So I recognized in the wind energy one we got lucky because there was this like government program that made it work. 2 years later, we tried one in flare gas, and then that one we were plugging along, and then that was the opposite. So the government program went away in that scenario, and then the economics no longer worked, and we had no business. And then so I was like,
How quickly did you get out of that? Within
immediately.
immediately.
Yeah, it was like this sucks.
There was no other option.
It's like
Honestly, like making those gut calls to pull the plug, sometimes founders don't.
yeah, I mean, look, I think just once the economics don't work.
You're like, I have no business here.
Yeah. And so after that, I was like, I'm not getting into regulated industries anymore. And
Yeah.
stumbled my way into banking because I'm a dummy.
Yeah. You like the hard problems.
I do.
Yeah.
I do.
You've spoken in the past about like how impenetrable these industries look like from the outside and the fact that they're not when you actually go into it. Can you speak a little bit more about that? Because the average person is like, these are insane industries, energy and banking to try to tackle. They're competitive.
Especially in Canada.
High barrier to entry, especially in Canada.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of things that are underrated about this. So first of all, these companies, their incentive structure is awful. And so like over time, these banks and most of these energy companies have like 8 to 10 times more people than they need, and they've massively overhired, and there's like calcified processes, and like this is why banking kind of sucks. And this is why whatever. And so companies, it is an incredibly hard problem to keep companies lean and efficient and close to the customer over time. Now you don't know that coming in, but like if we take the wind energy company, all of those companies were laughing us out of the room when we started. And if they would have paid attention with like as an associate and an intern, they could have put 5 times more applications in than we did, and they could have smoked us. And they just like don't have their eye on the ball.
Do you think that is a more Canadian perspective of not realizing how competitive and how high risk things are compared to the US? Or do you think that this is just a large mover? You're going to see this anywhere you go with established industries?
I think both are true. It's probably particularly true in Canada. Building a company, like a lot of people have tried to figure out how to make companies great. A lot of very smart people, and most companies over time suck, and most companies over time fail. Like almost every, like the amount of people. I think the average life on the Dow Jones, which is theoretically some of the best companies in the world, is now like 20 years, and it used to be 80. Right.
Really?
So like, so these folks they blow up all the time. Almost every company dies or gets acquired, right? There's like, and that's, for better or worse, part of what makes our banks good in Canada. But so I do think that's part of it. I also think Canadians as a cultural kind of direction lack ambition and lack, frankly, courage. And I maybe that's too unfair, but it is kind of a learned behavior. Toby at Shopify has talked about this a lot, but you kind of have a go for bronze culture.
Yeah.
And I think Canadians need to realize that we've kind of coasted on America's coattails for a long time. And we actually, if we want to build our own thriving economy, we have to figure out how to be competitive at a global scale. And that means like a very different relationship to what it means to being successful.
I have a theory that because we now have just so much more exposure through the internet, through social media, we adopt a bit more of cultures of the US, of different countries. And I personally think that like our generation, the early 20s as well, are seeing a bit more of like a risk appetite, a boldness that maybe like my parents' generation didn't see.
It's actually kind of like different cultural cuts. So if you think about our parents' generation, I think it was like fairly homogenous because all of your cultural inputs were local. So it'd be your town, your community, your church, and that would be like some miasma of whatever that was. And now, if you're an ambitious 30-something female, you can like go find a pocket of people on the internet that are like deeply reflective of ambitious 30-something females, right? So you have kind of like vertical cultures versus horizontal ones. And so I think that is true if you find yourself in that pocket, but you can also find yourself in pockets of like socialism where it's like capitalism doesn't work, or
Yeah,
like
that's
I think
Like anything.
a big
Yeah.
kind of cultural problem that we have is we don't understand how much of a miracle capitalism and the place that we operate is. Like, this is a
Structure.
total cultural anomaly in human history to have this much peace, this much wealth, this much prosperity. Historically, it doesn't exist. And all of these civilizations end, most of them violently. If you like look back through history, that's kind of a bummer, but it's also a fact. And so I do think there is just an awareness of what it means to be in this culture that we have like totally lost sight of in Canada.
So how does Canada then start to make that shift culturally from a bronze to a gold?
Yeah,
What are the steps?
I think that the only job of government is human rights
Mhm.
and GDP growth. Like, I think that's kind of it. And we can talk about, and the reason that I say that is Tyler Cowen wrote this book, great book called Stubborn Attachments. And in it, he talks about America. And America's GDP growth from 1900 to 2000 was roughly 4% a year. If it would have been 3% a year, today America would have the wealth of Mexico. So what that means is that marginal outer bound of GDP growth certainly generated mRNA vaccines, certainly generated space travel,
Mhm.
certainly helped them win World
That
War II.
additional 1%.
Yeah,
Yeah.
times 100 years of compounding,
Yeah.
right? So then you're like, and then it also pays for Social Security, pays for roads, all of that kind of stuff, right? Like the amount, America became the wealthiest country in the world, and it would not be without that marginal 1%. And so these things really matter,
Mhm.
right? And then if you look at it through that lens, comes to Canada. Canada has had 0.5% of GDP growth in 10 years on an adjusted basis. So America's growing 4% per
These
year.
numbers are pretty pathetic.
Those are, yeah.
It's actually like really, really bad.
Yeah.
And so, and when I say that, I mean, we're at the bottom of the OECD. Like, we are getting outcompeted by Italy, Spain, Brazil, like all of them.
Yep.
Mhm.
Right. And so what I think there's a few kind of things that we need to, and we are starting to culturally acknowledge, but one of them is we're getting our butts kicked, like, globally.
Mhm.
And we talked about family before we came online. Like, I care a lot about this because I want my kids to have a good set of opportunities. And if we don't turn this around, they unquestionably will not.
Yeah.
And so so I think the first thing is like we have to have an acknowledgement that we are losing.
Mhm.
And that means like thinking about this in terms of winning and losing. So if we think about that from then the GDP lens, we have to then and we've gotten better here, put people in power who acknowledge that like that's the important thing to get
Yeah.
done. Like, we
Like,
have to
yeah.
create prosperity and wealth. We have to create social mobility.
Mhm.
In Canada, we have, 33% or union employment, which is 3x the United States.
Yeah.
Government has
Yeah.
grown 40%. Like we
What were the numbers that you once cited on like IRS versus
CRA?
CRA?
Yeah, so per capita, it's not 1-to-1, but like per capita, the CRA has 6 times more employees than the IRS,
Which is
Crazy.
insane.
which is insane.
Like,
This is like I think part of it is like we think that we're a little bit off the mark because we like don't have a
For a
good
lot.
barometer.
for a lot.
But like, yeah, I mean, so in Vancouver, where I live, we're building a train, and it's on the order of $400 million per kilometer. In Barcelona, they're doing it for $39 million per kilometer. Like, they're doing it 10 times cheaper in a developed country. Like, why is that?
Yeah.
A couple things in that instance. First of all, and this is really important, they give a lot of power to municipalities, and so they're like more city states. And
Mhm.
we can get into like government theory here, but basically the broader a problem set has to travel, the more. And so Canada has nobody actually really knows. Canada has somewhere between 150 and 200 kind of extra judicial agencies that are basically an outsource of the House of Commons, and then they've given these folks legal authority. And then when you're building stuff in Vancouver, you're like, before you know it, you're doing environmental assessments for the burrowing owl, and that lives in Ottawa, and that requires, you know what I mean? So like the
So
consultation,
connection and
you like have this enormous
Complex.
scope of people involved. So that's kind of one thing, is like they've given a lot of power to local authority, which is the way that it should be. And then the second thing is, and I've got a little bit involved in my municipal politics, they will hear people out in a local contest, but they will not give them voting authority.
Right.
And so in Canada, like, it is incredibly hard to get things done because ultimately you just have NIMBYism, and these things get stuck in development
Right.
for 10 years and 5 years of environmental assessments. And like, government compounds because things that are slow become expensive, and then they get slower because they are expensive.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you kind of have this like runaway cost structure.
Yeah.
And so yeah, there's like those are like the two big things is they will hear people out, but you do not get a vote on these things. Like they will live up to their civic duty, but they're not going to like have years and years of consultation meetings with like local communities to build a train that everybody knows that we need.
I imagine with like a municipality focus too, like because it's more localized, the connections to the business community is stronger, the connection to the community is stronger. You're also just going to have better ideas, more efficiency, because it's more collaborative than if you're thinking of something that's like so separate from where the problem actually is.
And it's way more, it's like way more pragmatic. These agencies that we have built in Canada, and the United States has many of them too, but they actually have like a lot of legal power over Canada, and they don't actually have that much oversight, right? So you will create something like you have some government organization like the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. And then all of a sudden the Environmental Protection Agency kind of gets to set their own mandate. They don't really have checks and balances.
Right.
And then like you have that times 150 agencies times municipal, provincial, and federal structures. And you're like, it's no wonder shit doesn't get done.
Yeah.
And most of those people too have been in public sector oftentimes all of their life. Like for me, I would love to see it be a requirement that you need to be in the private sector before going public, and that you maybe like need to like everyone needs to serve their
really good idea.
like every decade or something. What we go out for a year to some position that's relevant based on our experience, and then we go back. And then it's like everyone's more involved. Everyone understands the government better and how it works. Everyone has the experience to actually apply realistic solutions.
But all the tools that you learn in private sector, like accountability, metric tracking, actually having it
You're
like,
bringing it.
led like meritocracy, having people be held accountable, like all of that. Why is it so painful? And I know government is not a company, but why is it so painful for government to be led a little bit closer to how we lead companies? Like it doesn't make sense why there's such a disconnect, and like something like firing someone if they're not doing their job appropriately is so difficult.
What you're talking about was the initial model of government. Like that is the reason they called it public service. These people were often like really good operators and industrialists, and many of them deeply imperfect, obviously. But that was the idea: was you would go in and you would do your public service, which is to like manage the state, and then you would come back out. The history of this is actually super interesting. So what happened in the 50s is Lyndon Johnson started passing some social security acts, which were actually really beneficial and mostly kind of protected minorities and that model. Insofar as that, they created these agencies. Okay. And if you think about what would happen before, is there's actually like very little money in government. And there's a few things that changed. So first of all, these agencies started getting created. And then once these agencies started getting created, like before, the only way to get involved in government with your checkbook would be, I'm going to sponsor you to run for office. And you were some broad reflection of a bunch of different ideas. But now there's an environmental agency. And so within having an environmental agency or some social security agency, you now have a lobbyist who is only focused on maximizing that vertical change within whatever that is: farming, social security, dairy production, what have you. And so now you actually would have like whole industries that were very incentivized to put money to work because they could attack a very specific problem versus one politician who would maybe represent their interests, right?
Yeah. Right.
So that was one part of the game. The other part of the game was media changed. And so before, people would run for office and they would sit down in front of the radio and they'd be like, I believe in XYZ. And then all of a sudden television comes in and local ad campaigns come in. And all of a sudden these campaigns went from, a few $1,000s to these folks are spending like 150, 250, $500 million on a presidential campaign.
Yeah.
Right. And so the money around this stuff has grown exponentially. And so as a result, government now has something to sell. And as a result of it having something to sell, there's like a lot of influence in these types of games that can be played. And you can look at this, right? Like, so government as a percent of GDP has grown on the order, like if you adjust for inflation, is like 10 times bigger than it was in the 1960s.
So pivoting a bit to company building. So when you thought about starting KOHO and getting into the banking sector, how much of a point of view did you have at that point on strengths, weaknesses, what you learned from the previous company and what you wanted to do differently? And how did you apply that to starting a second company?
One of the things that I definitely took away from the first company was how sort of inept these big organizations are. I think actually the thing that I think about it a little bit differently, which is there's very few variables that you can control in a career. There's really only two, particularly if you're a founder. And one is like, are you proud of the work? And then the other one is like, do you care about the people you do the work with? Right. But if you actually price luck in the way that I do, which I think it's like quite determinative.
That's a huge role.
Yeah, huge role. Then you shouldn't worry so much about whether the business is going to work or not. Like I will never regret whether KOHO worked or not. I would not have regretted shooting my shot at something that I thought could be useful for 1 or 2 or 10 million Canadians, you know? And then, but to answer your question more directly, like, look, I didn't know anything about the industry when I started, you know? So there was like very little that was transferable, but you know, over time, obviously now I've been at it and kind of obsessed with it for a decade. And so now I'm probably an expert at it.
You said you didn't have any experience.
Yeah.
And this is something that you talk about as being very overvalued is someone's experience. I think you also say data is also overvalued.
Yeah.
And there's one thing that's undervalued, which is
Horsepower? Conflict.
Conflict.
Yes,
Conflict.
I am talking about conflict being like
conflict
underrated.
undervalued.
Yeah. So maybe just an experience first. My, like, if I came from a background of banking and I said I'm going to start a better bank, it'd be like, we should pay higher interest rates. You know, you'd end up in this like very marginal place. If you actually want to win, you have to do something that is like meaningfully better. Today and in the future, KOHO's cost structure will be 100 times better than the banks, and then we get to pass that on to users, right? We paid one of the highest savings rates in the country. We have the lowest international money transfer costs in the country.
Yeah.
Had I come in with an experience of banking, it would have been like a really marginal product improvement. But we hired like game designers and physicists and just like a very different first principles.
Innovation.
Totally. So that
And some ignorance probably.
for sure.
Yeah.
But we like codified this in the early days of KOHO. It was like we should like cherish naivety, you know, because it's like so important in taking a first principles view. So if you actually want to disrupt it, experience is in many ways a liability. As you scale though, you know, as you're figuring it out as a CEO, like experiences can be a bit of a security blanket because your board likes getting experienced people and you're like, they're an adult, you know? I have found it's not that it's like a bad thing. It's just it applies in way fewer scenarios than people think.
Right.
Experienced people are way more likely to be dogmatic and like every problem's a nail or whatever that expression is, right? So they actually don't have that much intellectual latitude, and it's actually really expensive. And it's not that experience isn't valuable, but like they just don't make good employees.
Or advisors and
There's many ways that you can get that experience, which is super useful in very narrow bands at 1/100th of the cost. And I used to think that it was like I was willing to sacrifice on horsepower if they were really experienced, and I'm just not at all willing to make that trade anymore. Like if you have horsepower. So the three things that we hire for at KOHO, particularly on the executive team: horsepower, warmth, and humility. And that is like such a universal benefit relative to experience, you know, because it's just applicable in so many more scenarios. So we can talk about conflict or data or the other ones too, but I just think particularly for young CEOs, young companies, you tend to be deferential to experience. And it's just like, if you actually want to change an industry, then of course you need to do things 10 times better. And experience is like, came up in, frankly, like by making things marginally better. You know, it's just like you're playing a different game.
Are some of your early day one team members or like the generalists, people from different industries still with you today?
We have folks that are like, I think our oldest employee is now 8 years at KOHO. We have a number of folks at 7. We call it the OG club. When you hit 5 years, you get a backpack. It's like, and people like, I think, care about it. So KOHO has gone from, we launched in 2017 with no revenue, and, you know, we're in the hundreds of millions at this point. And so to keep up an environment that's changing like that, like it takes a pretty special person, you know, or what you needed in like as a Series A company is very different than what you need as a Series D company.
That's what I was going to get at.
Yeah. So some people make that transition. Some people don't. We try and be pretty disciplined, and like we have a fairly high turnover rate in terms of how we track these things, but like particularly if you're going to run a small company and keep your headcount pretty lean, you have to protect your stars and protect the people that are making that transition by having tough conversations with the people who aren't. Trying.
As you grew and scaled, how did you guys support the A players? Because we're kind of experiencing that right now. I talk to you about this all the time. We were a group of 5 generalists that built this company, obviously got it to the stage that it is right now. We're now over 100 people.
Congrats.
Some of these early generalists are now being obviously forced into headcount responsibility and management roles. We're all starting to operate less like individual contributors. And I feel like these like stages of growth are so predictable in startups. Are there any learnings for founders listening to this too? Learnings, tactics, things you put in place to either support the A's or like org design, I feel like is so underrated too. And like
100%.
how that unlocks growth. I feel like we spend so much time talking about like revenue and cohort analysis and all the metrics. I'm like, sometimes it really is just like structuring the leadership team the right way. And
100%. Yeah, I love tactical conversations like this. So there is a tendency in these kind of scenarios to put in process. And I think people by and large put in process for what are cultural problems.
Right.
And so like it's a pretty good heuristic to ask, and you'll see these things and these things will break naturally. And that's okay. Because what you're actually trying to do is like have things break, understand where those things break and fix it. And that's like the cycle of growing a company.
Yeah.
One of the questions there's a few questions that we ask every week in C-level, but the ones that are most useful for us are, what are we not talking about that we should be? Where was there bullshit in the company this week? And what is annoying our top performers? And like, those are such good directional things of being like, oh, this process, because your top performers hate arbitrary process because they just want to go win.
Yeah.
So we regularly ask those questions. When it comes to how we manage for this, we have something called the KOHO 50. And so the KOHO 50 is the idea that, and I'm sure you see this at your company, but like 20% of the people are responsible for 80% of the impact. It's called the Pareto principle, right?
It's like with initiatives too, right?
Yeah,
like
totally.
Unpack,
and so we would look at these kind of things about how we're operating and these kind of peanut butter employee metrics. And we felt like the best way to make sure that everybody at KOHO had a great experience was to build an incredible core of people.
Right.
And so if you're 100 people, like I would spend all your time thinking about the 20 people or the 25 people that are in the most important, not the most important people, doing the most important jobs. And so we identified like at KOHO, the 50 most important seats. And that's all we talk about when we're doing like our analysis. And so with the idea being that like, if we have stars that are not in one of these seats, they're probably not being as impactful as they could be. If we have a star in this seat who leaves, that like is super painful. So we should make sure they're like happy and compensated and whatever we're managing for flight risk. Conversely, if we have an underperformer in these seats, that's like a much bigger drag on the company than if they're kind of like a junior admin person or whatever. Right. And so we really need to like coach that person up or out. And so we try and have like a pretty concentrated view of this kind of stuff. And then to bring it all the way back, people's natural tendency is to put in process when things break. I think it's really important that startups kind of like normalize things breaking. It's kind of the job to figure it out as you go along.
Break and build. Yeah.
Totally. And people, it takes a certain type of person to be okay with that, you know? And so for us, what we saw a lot is people trying to put in process when it was actually just a cultural problem.
Yeah.
And it's a good heuristic to ask would be like, would you have to put this process in place if this was one of your top performers? And if you would, then like maybe it's a good process.
Yeah.
But like most of the time, process is a response to underperformance.
Right.
And so you're just like, it's probably the wrong person.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not that they can't be coached or improved or whatever, but most of process response is a function of just having the wrong person.
And then when you said earlier conflict is underrated,
Yeah.
I wanted to touch on this as well, because I agree. I think it like you end up surfacing so much truth with conflict. You end up having humility, defending your points.
Yeah.
Totally.
I think it sets apart. You see who's really ambitious and cares. So I think there's a lot of place for conflict.
100%.
How have you developed a culture that supports healthy conflict?
I actually think that's part of the reason. So the reason that the two values of that warmth and humility are so important is because without humility, you tend not to have a lot of like intellectual honesty around debates, and people are in their fiefdoms or whatever, or they're threatened and they're playing like
Their
this
ego
defensive.
Do like
Totally.
and
Yeah.
with it.
Totally. And so you end up having kind of these like really fractured conversations. But then warmth is such a leading into like it sets up those conversations so well because you care about the people, and it's like the precursor to psychological safety, so that you can kind of like challenge the person.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So those cultural things matter. And then we have like, there's a guy named Ravi Gupta. He's a partner at Sequoia, and he has this 2x2. But I think great leaders are both very demanding and very supportive. And so, yes, of course, you have to be supportive if you're going to be demanding. But like, the stuff becomes self-reinforcing because ultimately a startup has to be truth seeking if you want to win. And that means that you have to like do all of this cultural work to create the conditions that you can be truth seeking.
Yeah.
Right. And so that means if I'm coming at you every day and not supportive, then eventually you're just going to be like, this doesn't, I'm out, you know?
Yeah.
And conversely, if you're like very supportive, but you're not having the right conversations, then you're going to lose. So it's not easy. It is a culturally ambitious thing to aspire to. And it's usually like a good question to ask, like what's in the best long-term interest of the culture? Because there's a lot of like short-term pain that people avoid for the sake, but it's like clearly the right thing to do is to just create as many low ego people as you can who are very smart, who can debate things thoroughly, and then like more often you'll be right and your rate of learning will go up a lot. You know?
Yeah.
Advice.
Yeah, I think that level of transparency is important. And I think it clearly comes from you because we see that online with the level of transparency you have with conversations. And now have you woven that into the business with things like data transparency,
Sure.
starting to share that? Where do you think that as a principle for you came from?
I think there's kind of like two things. One is, if you want to go fast as an organization, I think you have to decentralize decision making. Like, and I also think like so if you're going to do that, then people need context, autonomy, and responsibility. And if they don't have that, then like, who cares if you decentralize decision making if they have shitty information that they're making the wrong, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so we do some different things differently, whereby like we'll have a board meeting, and then we're 250 people today, and then like the next week we'll sit down and we'll go through the exact same board material. So like everybody at KOHO knows what the financials are, they know whatever, they
The
know.
board asked about.
Yeah,
That night.
totally. And it's like trying to create that alignment. And it is both a useful gesture, so people have context on the business, but it's also like a symbolic one, right?
Yeah.
Which is to say, like, I'm a junior software developer, and like I know what the company's financial, you know what I mean? And we've been burned by it before, and we'll probably get burned by it again. But on balance, it's so worth it to have like your star performers be well informed and feel like they have the trust, and it's like a two-way street. And
They also have the full picture too to come up with the solutions, right?
100%.
And see how it's applicable to specific day-to-day situations.
yeah, it's like such a good trait
Yeah.
relative to
And
the risk.
to understand the big picture, like I find where we sometimes struggle is obviously being in healthcare, you're always trying to balance the needs of medicine, which is like patient outcomes, balance the needs of doctors and care team, which is like they want to practice at the highest standard of license and like be supported in their job, or support the business, which is profitability. And then you want to support consumers, which is like pricing and affordability.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's like having the entire organization, I don't know what the equivalent would be at KOHO, but like have a shared language around
Totally.
all the buckets, the trade-offs, how we think about decisions. Otherwise, someone's like, great, you made this decision in favor of medicine, but it didn't support the business.
The thing is, like, there is no formulaic answer to that stuff, which is why the conditions for debate are so important, because, and we have tried to create, like, yeah, we have a culture at KOHO, but how your, I don't know, data protection team should have a different culture than how your doctor-facing team, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
And so we have tried to create subcultures within KOHO and give folks the autonomy to go do that, because how these teams operate should of course be different, and then there should of course be rigorous debate, and there is no perfect answer, and many of these things are like in the bounds of reasonable people can disagree, so like let's just make the decision quickly and move on. And
Yeah.
you know, it's much more about rate of learning than it is about getting it right.
Yeah. I'd love to also understand, how do you spend your time, like I guess for founders and entrepreneurs listening to this at this stage, how do you spend your time? How much is working on the business versus in the business? Where you zoom in out?
It's something I've thought a lot about, because probably like you folks, my job's changed a lot as we've gotten to a certain size and scale. But I'm like naturally a hard worker, and naturally I'm probably more of a COO by traditional definition than a CEO. Like you're much more likely to find me like pouring through cohort charts than in conversation, you know what I mean? And like telling the KOHO story.
Yeah.
But that said, I've now got like a really good team around me. For a long time, frankly, it's not that we didn't have it, but it was just like a different stage, you know? And so, yeah, look, now I spend my time we've talked about this within KOHO, but like when you start your career, you tend to do very like linear operational tasks, and then you're high horsepower and you work hard, and therefore you get promoted and you build this muscle of being like kind of a first in, first out, right? And then I do very little direct work anymore, right? So much more of my leverage comes from like working on the right part of the problem set with the right folks than it does about doing concrete work.
Yeah.
So you do still go deep on specific
I go
problem
very
sets.
deep. I'm a very operational CEO,
Okay.
and it is an expectation of executives at KOHO that they are very operational. I think it is a total myth that executives should like get out of the weeds. I think that's really bad advice and a recipe for irrelevance. What a good executive should be able to do is like switch context. So you can go down and you can look at the individual data on a weekly or daily cohort performance chart, and then you can zoom up and contextualize what that means in the broader context of the business, and then bring all that information to bear. Right. And so, yeah, the expectation is like for executives at KOHO, is why the horsepower value is so important, is like, yeah, we are a very operational team. I spent like 2.5 hours in cohort charts yesterday. I have kind of more freedom to do that, and I kind of go where my instincts like suggest. Typically, there's really only 2 or 3 things that matter at the business in any given time, and I try and spend all my time on those things.
Yeah. Ruthless.
No, I love that. Because like how many times when we were early in our career in consulting was just like, so it was so clear that the partner asking for whatever it needed had no idea how it was actually going to get done. And I always found that the particularly managers that were the best were ones that moved up very quickly because they had been near the problems that they were asking people to fix very recently. So they understood the work effort. They understood what the actual process was and how to help them better. So I think that's a good strategy.
This is why I think conflict is so important, and it's not unhealthy, but I try and like pressurize these environments to like have rigor around these decisions that are being made. And like the first time it's kind of spooky, but the 5th or 10th time people understand what it is and that we're all just trying to be truth seeking. The only kind of thing to pre-wire, if you're gonna, particularly as a CEO, and I try and pre-wire this, is like I'm a fairly conflict oriented CEO, but I know that my hit rate's not 100, right? So it is incumbent upon particularly my executives and my peers to be like, you didn't show up the right way, or like that was really dumb, or you're creating thrash. And then that way, like I can go hard and pressurize things, but I also have error correction in my system whereby I will get a better understanding of like how to show up, where to push, what matters, what doesn't matter. And yeah, I just kind of like come back to this idea of being truth seeking as an organization. If you coming back to like the early career thing is like you have n blocks of work and each block of work has basically a linear impact. But working on the right or wrong thing as you scale in your career is like, and as an executive, it's not like a 30% differential. It's like, are you doing 10x more value or 0, right? So, and this is part of the way that we try and develop people is they have to take space. They have to learn how to be strategic. Like it's a very hard transition for people to make. We try and help them in figuring out how they can build their operating system to do that. But yeah, like it isn't kind of, that is the, and I used to cringe at the idea of being strategic because I thought it was like bullshit, but it's actually just like creating the conditions to be thoughtful about where the highest leverage is.
That's so funny.
But it was like, but it was like, it wasn't like strategy. It was just like everybody who had strategy in their title didn't work. You know, like they didn't do jobs. Like, what did you build?
I'm the most analytical strategy person.
Exactly.
No, it's
so
fair.
It's like, you know, you like chief strategy officer, and I'd be like, what do you do all day?
So I hate when people define themselves, and you know, I've been on a rant about this when people are like, I'm strategic, I'm not analytical, or I'm analytical, I'm not creative, I'm this, I'm not that. I'm like, there's this, like, you could do both.
These are not.
These are not fine. Also need a mix. You also need a mix to be the best.
I don't understand. Like,
So
maybe it's because we early in our career had to be like, yes, we were analyzing vast amounts of data, but then also creating like a punchy slide with like fun words. It was just, you had to do it all. You've been so intentional about how you've built KOHO and a bit of like, I'm going to call it like a modern ops playbook to people management with all of the things that you put in place. So 6-month probation, which you talked about, offering secondaries to all employees, which I thought was insane. 10-year, in a good way, 10-year option expiry windows, coaches for everyone. KOHO has also won a ton of awards in the space. So, I mean, it's sort of makes sense as to why, but how were you always this thoughtful? Did someone inspire you? How did you get to making some of these decisions? And are there ones that have had a more disproportionate impact?
So initially, when we've always had coaching at KOHO, it was honestly out of insecurity. I was like, why would anybody want to learn from me? Like I should like give them a good career experience. I think I did feel like a deep obligation to my employees early on, and then to the team. And so I felt like coaching was a good way to like augment my own shortcomings. Honestly, and I don't know, I don't think I've said this publicly before, but like with the wind energy thing, it got very contentious with me and my co-founder at the end. And without dragging him, like I would never have conducted myself that way. And so it's kind of a reaction to like, I don't know if I can swear on this, but like,
knowing
fuck
what
you.
not to do.
Yeah. And so I was like, I'm never going to treat people the way that
You were treated.
you did.
Yeah.
And so it was like it was a response to that. And so, but it's also just like, like it's really fun to win together, and it's also super rational. I want people to be deeply financially incentivized. Like, does it matter at the end of the day if I own 10% of this company or 12 in a whatever 100 or
also if it makes it bigger by giving them more, right?
100%?
Want to own like 100%
Why
nothing or like 10% of something huge.
100%. You're just trying to get as many talented people in the door as you
Yeah.
can, right?
Yeah.
And so we've now done 4 secondaries for employees. We actually did one 2 months ago, and it makes it very real, and people care about equity value in ways that they don't when they're very unlikely to see it. And then they have like these, I think 3-month option expirations should be illegal. Like, I think the idea that people work for 4 years and then somebody gets sick, they got money back to India, and now they owe you $150,000 for their compensation is like crazy to me.
It is.
I think it's a gross practice.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think there's a bunch of things that went into it, and but I'm also just at a meta level, like kind of obsessed with this company.
It's incredible.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about KOHO, about policy. We want to talk a bit about you, lessons learned, some of your personal life. You're a second-time founder now.
Yep.
What were the lessons that you brought in to starting KOHO that you would give to other founders who aren't coming in with that experience of having exited?
I think it is a totally rational decision to be really good to your team. I remember early on when we were creating, we just raised money and I was trying to get more options for the team. And my board member was rightly like, they don't understand options. Why would we give them 3% of the company or whatever it was at the time?
The value of it?
Yeah, because they like
Not
don't
educated on the value.
because they don't. It's like you're not going to change any behavior. They don't understand it, which is a totally fair comment. And so I said, yeah, like let's go educate them and let's go to them. And the only reason that transaction makes sense is if you generate the goodwill and the change in behavior from your team.
Yeah.
So you kind of got to be uncomfortable. And like, this is going to sound self-congratulatory. It's not how I mean it, but like when we did the last vesting or the last secondary, like I didn't participate in that, and I went to bat for it on the condition that I was not going to participate in it, and it was purely for employees. But there's no point in doing that stuff if then the employees don't appreciate it and understand it's like kind of not a standard thing to do.
Especially if that was you're like the first exit into the startup world. They
Totally.
just think this is like baseline common practice.
Right. And so it's like kind of uncomfortable, but it's also totally the right, like you kind of have to do it. And this is what's underrated about hard problems is if I was like starting nth photo sharing app, your ambitious people are not going to go work for that company because it's not an interesting problem to solve. But there's this there's this inherent pocket of people who are willing to like take long shots because they think the work can be useful and impactful and they care about that kind of stuff. Yeah. So your ability to get talented people is way easier if you're doing like a hard problem. And so I actually think hard problems are underrated for this reason because one, there's just very few people who do them. So like by definition, not that many people are going to try. I don't know how many people have started a photo sharing app, right? And then the quality of the people that you will get and the bullshit that they're willing to put up with is way higher because they're just way grittier. They're attached to something way more meaningful, and they're willing to take a much longer term view. So my 2 things would be like, solve a real problem. Like the amount of talent that goes into not productive things is kind of a real shame, and be really good to your team.
Is there an archetype that you think shouldn't be a founder?
For sure.
What would that be?
Look, I think if you are like financially driven as a primary motive, there's just way easier ways to make money than as a founder. I also think you should, and I don't claim like everybody's on their own journey with self-awareness, but if you lack self-awareness, it will show up in your company. There's this coach named Jerry Colonna, and he's like, whatever childhood trauma you're bringing into this, it will be reflected in your company, you know? And I think that's true. Like
Yeah.
you kind of have if you don't feel like you have a deep sense of obligation to your team, to your customers, to your investors, I think you're not going to be a good founder, right? Like
Well, you'll be getting in your own way from day one.
100%.
Yeah.
It's a real, you should take the responsibility of hundreds of careers or hundreds of millions of dollars or the X million users like really seriously, you know? And that comes with a lot of weight and pressure and pain and anxiety and all that kind of stuff. But I think if you're not doing it for something bigger than yourself, I think you're going to lose, or at least get out competed.
Yeah.
What are the biggest sacrifices that you've made along the way, and have they been worth it in hindsight?
I worked my butt off for a long time. And that's like, okay, I have no, you can't, it's very hard to be where it seems like KOHO's working. Like, I don't regret it. The price of admission is high, in terms of not just the hours, but the emotional toil. There's,
and your kids would have been basically newborns at the very early stages,
yeah.
right?
Daughter.
yeah, I was
prior
probably
to that.
5 years in when Lola, my daughter, was born. But like I don't work now the way that I did, and like that's by design, right? Like I was kind of a maniac when pre-kids, and I think people should be maniacs.
I was about to ask, do you think everyone kind of needs to go through that
Yes.
phase? Yeah, I
100%.
agree.
Like, there's no way to do it where
No, like
and,
hard
like,
work is the price of admission.
Yeah.
And then like caring a lot about it. And so I've had a lot, I had this is being quite there's like weeks at a time where I would fall asleep and then wake up soaked in sweat 10 minutes. So I just like didn't sleep for extended periods of time. I have like we've almost died 3 times as a company.
Like a few weeks of money left in the bank.
Yeah, totally. Or like something that was like, if this blows up, that kind of stuff. We've really almost run out of money twice, and then we've had one other kind of thing, which was like, if this breaks this way, like we're hooped. Yeah.
Well, I'd love to come back and hear strategies for how you came to the other side of that. But because I totally agree with working hard.
Yeah.
I think what we've reflected on a lot is in our 20s, we both worked really hard. I almost used to it was to a point where I almost used to pride myself on being able to sacrifice more, on outworking, being able to focus more than like the average person. But at some point I was like, where is this coming from?
It was our whole identity.
It's been a hard pivot to be like, where does my identity come from?
Yeah.
Did you find, I guess when you became a father, that's like the next kind of big unlock. Did those elements change what was previously just maniacal?
I didn't have that experience where I was like, I had a kid and then it took a long time for me to, I remember talking about this, Lola was maybe 2.5, and I was still very much measuring my self-worth in my day of like how productive I was as a CEO. And it had very little to do with how I showed up as a father. I've gotten a lot better at that, and now I think I'm much more there. But it took me like a long time. Like I think those channels run deep of like hard work and then being such a huge part of your identity. As I have scaled in my career, and I think you all are going to do this with your podcast, it does become a leverage game, right? And so one of the things about having a kid is it really forces you to clarify your time. So like the idea of doing like low value tasks right now is just almost like I can't stand it, because it's either like
trading
time away from my health or my kids or my wife or my job.
Yeah.
And so it really does like force a level of discipline into your calendar, which is really constructive and makes you play like a much higher leverage game.
Yeah. With having kids, so you're now kind of past the toddler point, at least with one of them.
With one, yeah.
Do you find,
Not with the other.
like, I do think certain people are either better parents / enjoy certain periods more in building a business at the same time? Like, are you now enjoying these periods more with them? Did you like the younger phases? Like, what's been your experience as a young dad?
It just keeps getting better. Like I keep, I think it was maybe Paul Graham who talked about this, but he calls it kind of like joy on tap. But the idea was like the moments that I have with my kids every day are like the best moments that I would have pre-kids, maybe once a month or once a quarter or something like that. And so it's like, it's always there, and it just like keeps getting better. The first kind of 6 months, they're just little sausages and they don't do anything. And then 2 is special, and then it's special for different reasons in 3. And then your relationship gets deeper, and they like kind of feel like they're these things that like a little bit more is chiseled away as they reveal who they are as people,
Is one of them more similar to you than the other?
Yeah, my daughter has like a strong chaotic energy that she
Okay.
gets from me. Yeah.
So she's going to be a
We call her
founder.
chaotic,
We'll
but
come back in 20, 30 years
Yeah,
and we'll see what she's up to.
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously, you've said in another podcast you grew up with a single mom, middle class, amazing Canadian lifestyle, started first company, sold it, came into some money. How has your relationship with money changed at all across kind of like the journey of your life so far?
I think I remember when I got my first big paycheck at KOHO. I mean, I have enough wealth now, like for what I need to do. You know, wealth has never been like a big motivating factor for me. I remember when I got the first big check, I felt like really kind of nothing. But then when I bought our forever home and I see my kids playing in that home, I'm like, oh, now I get it. You know, so I'm not like it's very useful. I'm like, it's awesome. It's great.
Okay.
So there is some minimum amount and everybody should like figure out what that number is and try and get to it. Honestly, and I wish that you could like shortcut this wisdom into people, but once you can like pay for a nice dinner and not worry about it, once you can like ultimately, if you at some point you're optimizing for like bigger square footage in a second home, which is like kind of crazy, it doesn't matter. It will not make you happier. All that stuff is like a cliche, but it's unquestionably true. So there is like, I don't care about it in that lens, but it is like energy insofar as like you can, once you collect this money, you can deploy it against things and those things can move needles. You know what I mean? So you can invest in startups that you like, you can support institutions, you can do things at your kid's school, whatever those kind of things are. So like there's certainly utility to it. Most of it is around how you can influence the world rather than it is anything like that improves your own life. So it hasn't changed that much. But it is kind of exactly what you would.
I assume it shapes how you make decisions with money in the business.
Well, so I mean, I think that like the core thing of KOHO is you can kind of say like we have a very inefficient banking oligopoly in Canada. So we have higher what's called capitalization requirements than the United States banks, and yet our banks are 50% more profitable.
That's right. When I heard that.
Yeah.
And so it's like, where's that come from? And it comes from Canadians, and often the most vulnerable Canadians. And so if you kind of do the math and the difference in having good or bad financial products is retiring with 30 to 50% more wealth, right? So if you were going to retire with 400K, now you're going to retire with 200K. So it's like very real when you have a country where 53% of people are living paycheck to paycheck. It's millions, if not, it's more than 10 million people. And the way that I think about this, both from the KOHO mission and my own kind of through line, is like very difficult to have agency if you don't have financial stability. And if you do the math, millions of people are doing everything right and deserving of financial stability, but they don't have it because we live in this like very unfair and kind of like economic monopoly. Right?
Yeah.
And so we kind of think we're in the agency business. And if we do our job, we can help people have more agency in their life. And that means going back to school or not having to go back to school or a second home or more time with family.
Dating a lot of founders now, you know?
Yeah, like I think it's kind of a luxury to start a business, and it's like really hard to do it when you're buried in debt and all that kind of stuff. Like I think it's actually the best lever for economic social mobility that we have is starting businesses.
Okay, so want to close out with some rapid fire.
Okay.
First one, what new feature or product are you most excited about that's in the works? To the degree of detail that you could tell us.
It's so cool to see our international money transfer product. I'm not trying to do a plug, but it's like it's gone to, I think, 95 countries at this point. And it's weird that all this money is flowing through. And then it's like in most countries in the globe at this point. So
lowest fees and fastest, right?
Lowest fees and fastest.
Amazing.
I think it's the best remittance product in the country.
Amazing. What gives you energy day to day?
My kids, reading, working out.
You guys have a $300 budget for employees for books. What book are you currently reading right now?
I'm reading 3. I'm reading
all at the same time.
Yeah.
Are there like specific times where it's like when's a bedtime?
Totally.
More like
this is
learning.
I try and read a lot, but it depends on what energy, like how much energy I have.
Yeah.
I'm failing the rapid fire test. So I just finished Sam Walton's biography, which is the founder of Walmart. There's a book called Douglas Murray about libertarianism and liberalism, which I'm reading right now. I think it's called We the People. And then my like silly book is a fantasy book called Dungeon Crawler Carl, which is like just slapstick fantasy, ridiculous.
If you could only share one piece of advice with your daughter and son, what would it be?
I just want them to be self-actualized. And so I want them to be kind to people. I want them to be curious enough to follow their own interests and then have the work ethic to go pursue them and see what they turn over.
Amazing.
Solid advice.
And final question, what would your future self tell you to do more of today?
Be kind to myself.
Mm-hmm.
I've recently I have recently come to the conclusion that I think grace and self-compassion are like deeply underrated. Yeah, and I think I've lost a lot of energy to that, so I'm sure that I will continue to.
Yes, amazing. Okay, well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank
Before we go, we like to let the audience know where they can find you. So what are your handles?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. It's just Daniel Eberhard. That's probably where I do most of my sort of more long form stuff.
Mhm.
And then I'm on Twitter a little bit. Yeah, there's a book list on LinkedIn that's published. If folks are interested, I publish all my reading.
Thank you for a conversation between two brunettes, and we hope you have a safe flight home today.
Thank you. This is super fun.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Between Two Brunettes. If you enjoy the show, please hit follow or subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast.
We love to hear your feedback and do our best to get back to everyone, so feel free to leave your comments or reach out to us on any of our socials.
See you next time.